and reject or doubt what is challenging our beliefs. And there is a subcategory of confirmation bias, which is called optimistic bias, which is that cognitive bias according to which negative things happen only to the others, they do not affect us. So we manage to keep them at bay. When you are subject to these two biases, we can concretely understand the effectiveness of the famous paradox, Plotinian paradox of the animal, where insect, you cannot ask which order the animal puts his legs, otherwise it will stumble. So we can act like this insect, or we can try and look for guiding criteria. And the words of the head of the police forces on the three main systems governing the trade of technologies and leads me immediately to set aside the state part and leads me to recognize that between creating and regulating, actually, there is no contradiction, because the only difference is in whether rules are set by the same private subject creating technologies, or whether those technologies must be limited by rules which are passed to protect the founding values of a community like the European Union or the individual member countries. Quite likely, by going beyond the imitation temptations, which are very Western imitation temptations towards a Chinese model, probably the time has come to try and build a transatlantic bridge between the needs for regulation, which are typical of the constitutionalists call the digital constitutionalism, because constitutionalism starts to limit public powers, but today's reality shows us that the challenge to rights, but the existence of states, and not only to their security, comes from private powers as well. And constitutionalism must necessarily, in order to keep the meaning of rule of law, must deal with the problem of limiting in private powers. And from this point of view, it is absolutely clear that that transatlantic bridge is necessary, but it escapes. Its designing escapes any horizon that my function gives me. If the cognitive biases are the being confirmation bias and optimistic bias, nobody might ask me to give you injections of optimism, because my observation point doesn't make it possible for me to do so, because reality shows every day that new technologies are the multiplier of the dangerousness of criminal networks, bring about thorough changes of the investigation scenarios. And there are also the problems due to the malevolent use of AI, starting from the already experienced forms on war theaters, which are then applied at commercial level as well. All of this leads to deep changes of the structure of the same gene code of the criminal networks. First of all, the technological dimension guides the selection of the members. In the past, it was violence. Those who were more ruthless or more bravely used violence were recruited and had leadership attitudes, which are now measured in another level: the ability to govern the use of technologies for criminal purposes. AI is already daily matter being used by both organized crime and terrorism in the field of money laundering. AI algorithms automate all the layering processes, making it possible to keep track of the financial flows, which are and this not only for investigation purposes but also in order to prevent the use of the financial system for money laundering purposes or for purposes of financing terrorism. Structures are changed and the recruiting processes are kind of guided, led by the ability of the people wanting to be recruited to govern new criminal markets and which are expansive, like starting from the ransomware, which are being large and expanded because of Gen AI, and this leads a push every criminal network to try and become global. I'm not even mentioning terrorism. If we read the report of the anti-terrorism committee of the Council of Europe in terms of the emerging patterns or misuse of technology by terrorist actors to realize what we are faced with. This is a phenomenon that, though it's in front of our eyes, is something that we do not manage to see. That is, very young people are being recruited by criminal networks, 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old. And this is a phenomenon which can be easily identified both in the neo-Nazi networks and in the jihadist networks. We've gotten to a point where meetings are being convened with practically all the prosecutors working in the courts for minors because of this. All of these risk factors have a powerful accelerator in the dynamics of the war theaters, which have always been a place where new technologies are being experimented when the ability of regulation is set aside. It's no longer needed. What we need is, or what is needed is just to resort to technologies. The war theaters are a factor for experiments, not only because of for unbridled technologies, but they are also a factor, are factors to which generate a different kind of mankind. Criminal networks are recruited in the war theaters and used for military purposes or recruited by military networks, recruited by the army. Once the conflict is over, what do you think they do? Do you think they will all become farmers? In the various war scenarios in Ukraine, as for instance, like in Middle East, Northern Africa, Western Africa, those who experience or experiment for war purposes the use of new technologies then will put those skills available to the best bidder, and generally criminal networks are the best bidders possible. And this, not to mention the ability of criminal networks to act regularly, on a regular basis, historical basis, in every geopolitical context as a proxy of hybrid conflicts. In our meetings, it is quite easy to find traces and signs of mixing of groups of drug traffickers and networks which perform murders commissioned by state or para-state organizations. It has very serious problems which are compounded also by the one figure which is constantly underestimated, which relates basically to mafia networks and the networks which revolve around the expectations of money laundering or reinvesting in the profits of the mafia organization. The traditional claim of impunity, which was looked for by trying to influence the political decision-making processes or resorting to violence or intimidation, or that traditional claim of impunity today, which ends up, which is closed with the Maxi trial in 1992. The value of that trial was the state can put on trial the biggest criminal organization. It can do that with the instruments of rule of law. That expectation of impunity is now fed in a different way because criminal networks, even the mafia ones, are increasingly encroached with the structures which look for systemic search for confidential information in terms of content, the level of investigation, the state of the art of investigations, the prospect of investigations. Because of this, the traditional contiguity areas of mafia groups change their aspects. They undergo thorough changes because in those areas, at the center, the core of that, there are the people and the businesses who can provide the technological services which are useful to monitor information, opaque information masses which are floating. But this is an issue which quite likely explains also the transformation of my office in Department of National Cybersecurity, because it is absolutely clear that mafia organizations and terror organizations are part of broader, more complex and more heterogeneous criminal hubs and centers which use and are also part of a complex illegal market of confidential information where there is a demand or a request by criminal networks to be involved and protagonist, or in some cases even the business intelligence if it comes from the economic power, or political competition if it comes from sectors of politics. It is clear that being faced with these scenarios, the paradox of the insect forces us to question and wonder, do we want to continue not to ask questions because we are afraid to stumble, as the invertebrate of the millipede is doing? Or do we want to ask a few questions? And these are questions which Vittorio Pisani was hinting at, since he has a position of responsibility. So he was giving names of this which correspond to crucial elements. I'm trying to give some additional names. For instance, there is a problem of cognitive subservience in terms of technologies used for investigation purposes, and this is not a problem which relates only to technologies which are generating different systems, but it is also related to the within the European Union, technologies within the European technologies. We have a problem of democratic reliability, that is a possibility of relying on the respect for values establishing the European Union and the Italian Republic. Technologies respected by these technologies built in systems which are different. The competition with the United States and Europe is not due to just character traits. In the United States, there is the First Amendment which protects the freedom of expression and thoughts. So there are no limitations, and it's not possible to constitutionally impose limitations to dissemination of hate speeches. But are we willing to set aside this important element of our constitution, according to which our republic and the union have the duty to prevent hate campaigns and the dissemination of hate speeches or elements of elements which attack the social cohesion and the democratic fabric. These are quite sensitive issues which cannot be discussed here. What I'm interested in most is to raise two problems. On the one hand, there is a regulatory deficit which is at national level. Other countries, not only within the European Union, deal with this, on the contrary, which has a important element relating to the use of technology for investigation purposes. It is the duties to be complied with in the custody and management chain of the mass of information, which is then being subject to investigations and trials. Every trial today now require the arrival, ideally on the desk of the magistrate, of information, amounts of information which are much higher than what has been done during the trial in 1992. And our ability to govern wisely but also rigorously these masses of information is extremely limited because of cultural gaps, which I called cognitive subservience, organizational deficit, because this problem is kept separate from the inspiring philosophies of the organizational systems we are part of, but also because of regulatory gaps and deficits, which in other countries are rigorously applied. The secret in terms of keeping investigations or information secret is less strong in Italy than it is in other countries. What are we supposed to do, being the transatlantic bridge not in the availability or the possibility for us to develop, and we must say that the Court of Justice European Union has played a very important role, and within European Union we can do a lot in this respect. I participated in the conference of the University Consortium of IT Cini to raise a problem of alliance between investigation system and university system, and I'm happy to hear this is also part of the policies of the development, not so much only in terms of the education and training, but on the practical operational point of view, because those regulatory deficits when it comes to storing and managing digital data being flown in the criminal trial, these gaps and deficits are made bigger by the fragmentation of the counterparts of the judicial system and the law enforcement bodies, from the most trivial activities like extracting the analysis of data in any type of device to the most complex ones like the issue of databases, or managing databases, or building the necessary technology frameworks to analyze those masses of information, which generally in trials have sizes and characteristics which are quite big. Just think of a trial or investigation in the field of financing terrorism. Can you easily imagine how difficult it is? This was carried out by the public prosecutor office in Genova, and there huge amounts of information are collected in Arabic, so you need to be able to carry out analysis which are necessary for security and for the trial. So it's not easy to find a solution. This is the reason why I proposed CINI and ICINN to establish a cooperation with the district prosecutor's office. And while we are talking, one of these district prosecutor's office, a meeting is being held to build a small project of analysis, integrated analysis of information collected in many different investigations in the drug trafficking field, which the services of judicial police are not able to analyze, not even know. This explains the complexity and the delicacy of the issues and the sensitivity of the issues we are trying to tackle, which will be somehow overwhelm the same idea we have, the idea itself we have of justice, trial, if not regulated. And from this point of view, the digital constitutionalism, which was established and was started in European Union, must find a way to have a dialogue with the North American constitutionalism and set aside the possibility of having a dialogue with technologies which are built in systems which deny the fundamental rights and freedoms, and which are light years away from the rule of law, and which are increasingly visible as hostile subjects. Thank you. Thank you, Prosecutor Melillo. Thank you very much. Last year, when you completed your contribution, you said, if you invite the next year, I will come because I like this audience for the exchange of views. We are thanking you and the head of police for the exchange of views.
So let's continue to talk about cybersecurity and improvements in legislation to be increasingly effective against cyber attacks. So Roberta, let's open the next panel, law enforcement and defense, and I leave it to you to introduce the next speakers. Yes, let's call up here on stage the director of the Postal Police Service for Cybersecurity, Ivano Gabrielli, and the Division General of the Air Force, Sandro Sanasi, who is the commander of the Web Operations Command.
Allora, comandante, benvenuto anche a
Okay,
lei.
Commander, welcome. Director Gabriele, what are the day-to-day challenges, including the technological ones, that you have to meet to fight cybercrime and cyber attacks and offenses against minors? And what are the jurisdictional limits which the head of the police referred to that can hinder your investigations? Well, first of all, please let me thank you for the invitation. And I can only start an answer to this very complex question by mentioning the two contributors, the national prosecutor and the head of police, who defined the perimeter where action is taken regarding operational actions. So it's legal, a legal perimeter, a technological perimeter, a perimeter made up of values and constitutional limits, where the law enforcement agencies are called upon to fight and prevent and engage in prevention. And obviously, this goes beyond the traditional law enforcement doctrine, also a doctrine where saw some limits, both jurisdictional and physical ones, for those who had to investigate and detect signs of criminal activities. Yes, perhaps all this can be done. Maybe we have some IT capabilities that technology had never even given us before. We're faced with an ocean of information, but the problem is retrieving this information, making them usable from a judicial point of view, and therefore usable for prevention and to fight this phenomena, because we're in a world where complexity has been added complexity, and our services are offered in a distributed manner, allocated different services. If they offer services, they offer services in the field of rights that need to be protected. But to protect those rights, we need to move in a world that is no longer the physical one. Then we have the jurisdictional boundary where we could intervene to carry out judicial police activities with the intervention of the judiciary that could adopt certain measures. Today, the jurisdictional boundary does no longer overlap with that of our territory. So we enter in the dimension of international cooperation. International cooperation requires its time, a certain amount of time, and has its rules, and it's based on the relationships between states. So within we can reach an agreement, and the latest measure is the e-evidence package, and very shortly we will be able to ask for evidence from a player operating beyond the national boundary. So prosecutors, investigators will be able to take action such as seizing certain or freezing certain activities. But this is only concerns Europe. But we are faced with global activities where there are actions that attack our rights and where we cannot react. We cannot put an end to an activity without having to consider the issue of a boundary, which today needs to be rethought compared to the normal and traditional idea of a sovereign domain and the exercise of judicial powers. And we need to move towards forms of streamlined, permanent cooperation between states, because and everybody, and this is something that has come up with other law enforcement agencies. We all have the same issues. And so I think we'll have to find a solution so that increasingly complex activities that need to be carried out can be carried out without having time constraints that inhibit the capabilities of investigators. Now, I'd like to mention a phrase mentioned by Antonio Manganelli, the head of police. Investigation is a patient study, search for truth, and constant exercise of doubt. I've taken this from a hall outside here where we've set up the press room, and I'd like to invite you beyond the press room. There is the a room with the shrine, the memorial to all the police officers who died in that service, and there's also the ashes of head of the police, Manganella. I would like to again thank the head of the police and the police academy that is hosting us, and those who thought about organizing CyberSec at the premises of the police, Ivano Gabriele. Now, I leave it to you, Roberta. So, Mr. Sanasi, what legislative improvements are needed to improve defense and to make it readier and effective in the current geopolitical context? So this is a $1 million question because now the COR operates based on what it can do based on the current legislation, but there are many projects underway in order to operate more significantly in cyber operations, both for proactive defense and, above all, offensive actions in order to make it possible for a multi-domain operation commander. So besides air, sea, and land, we have added space and cyberspace too, to have cyber weapons in certain contexts and for some things. And this has a specific feature. It is cross-sectoral. The cyberspace domain is cross-sectoral compared to other domains. And it has its own specific identity because we're seeing it right now and we're seeing it in the various wars. It has a strategic nature because it can produce effects to support actions in other domains or vice versa as a primary effect of a cyber weapon. So what does the COR do in this context? It's based on three pillars: normal CIS operations, day-to-day activities of the defense network, which is an integrated network of optical fiber, radio stations, and satellite networks to ensure the fundamental service of command and control to armed forces, and both at national and international level. And there's also a specific part relating to the management, so internet service provider for defense to ensure greater resilience to the service offered. It acts as a certifier, as an agency that can issue digital certificates, and we provide support to other public administrations, including the Ministry of Interiors, within the framework of a interministerial cooperation effort. And then we have the management of classified networks at national and international level. And added to this, there is the computer response team of the armed forces. And this falls within the national cybersecurity effort, which involves the agency, the National Cybersecurity Agency, the Postal Police, and the division relating to the security information. So in this framework, What I'd like to add is as one of cyber operations, which right now we are carrying out drills obviously when if there should be a different context, well, at that point, the legislative constraints fall, and because we are entering different, and here there's a huge debate about of below threshold for the traditional domains. That makes sense, but for the cyberspace domain, that is not proposal because if today I'm not in a position to do certain better protectors, I'll never be able to offer a possible effect to the commander of a cyberspace domain operation commander. So if I haven't prepared earlier or in advance, so we need to be ready, prepared for when something happens. We're doing this on our networks right now. We monitor our critical infrastructure in terms of military airports or critical infrastructure for defense. Obviously, this should be extended uh, at national level within the context of cooperation in order to be prepared to respond in case of need. Okay, Director Gabriele, in this new design of cyber posture, we shouldn't forget about talents. What is the best reform of the administration and government agencies in order to attract cybersecurity talents and technological innovation talents? Well, the issue of resources, which is something that is shared by everybody. My division, my service, and this agency, and it is common also to other states too. And this obviously leads to the issue of how to train youth, attract them within in the public administration, and obviously tackle a structural shortcoming that we're faced with, which is not only common to us, but with others, but because it's through the I keep on talking about other countries, but we when talking to other people, we can feel reassured because it gives us the idea that we're not lagging so much behind, that we have time to take action. We need to find a way to encourage this job offers. I think the administration can have an important role to play, and I think we can do this by offering the two things that administration can offer: training courses, firstly. So it could be the administration that can offer a high quality content training. Maybe there are some districts, some areas where there is obviously immature talents or competences, and so to provide training courses of excellence tied to universities, especially the most a significant important one. So the Italian excellence that we have, and then bring this within the public administrations that offer a second great opportunity. That is to deal with scenarios that are rarely visible with regard to professional experience that can be obtained in the private sector. So offer or give the possibility to the talents to choose a pathway within the structures of the public administration. It can offer high level training and high level of experience. I think we can do a lot here in that respect. And I think we can do a lot together because the work we do is not so different if we analyze the activities that are put in place by, the work that is done by a police officer or an ACN official or a person involved in intentional defense, so involved in a cyber attack. So to therefore provide training that can offer career within the administration. And then there's also an issue of financial resources and salary levels. But that's something we can deal with afterwards. Once these talents have acquired skills within the administration that can offer a lot. So that is a reform that can surely increase the cyber levels of our country. Roberta, last question for our commander. Yes, Commander Sanazzi, recently Minister Crosetto approved a strategy for defense to adapt it in all areas, even on the field in the coming 3 years. Why is it's AI-based defense, and why is it essential? I think it's essential for everybody, not just for defense. Defense has some fields of application for AI, which are extremely interesting now regarding cyber operations. Now, it's clear that AI can help. AI developed with proprietary tools in-house can help write malevolent codes. You can do this with external service providers, but if you can develop this in-house, you can provide support in that respect, and it can provide support at a cert to operators analysts to respond more quickly and analyze and obviously screen the many millions of events that arrive every minute. And that's the other aspect is command and control. That AI can be a huge accelerator in order to be of support always as specified. AI doesn't replace, there's always the ultimate decision maker, the commander, namely, who has responsibility for this, but it can provide support in examining a huge amount of data coming from the most disparate sensors. Let's think about the platforms such as the F-35 or the GK aircraft. It can bring together many sensors, not just an aircraft platform, so data that has to be examined and analyzed and suggest the line of action to the commander who has to take a conscious and informed decision. So it goes without saying that it's surely of great interest for defense, but also within the framework of government. Let us just think what it means to use AI tools to simulate, to create environments for realistic environments for drills, and this is already happened, but it can serve as a further accelerator in creating scenarios where there are virtual means and physical means that cooperate in the conducting an operation to improve staff learning capabilities. So the fields of application are innumerable. And obviously we need to have a discussion and a reflection on how we can put this on the ground, of course, because clearly the 3 pillars, computational capacity, algorithms and data. Computational capacity that can be bought, algorithms can be developed in-house or have them develop data. So we need to be very careful about data. And that's how I see it. This is my personal view, and not to be fascinated by the idea of resorting to hyperscalers, just be able to scale more quickly and easily. Because often there's a sort of weird association. Procurement processes are very complex within the public administration. The time needed is too long. Since you can't do that, I'll resort to external provider because it should simplify this. In my view, this entails some inherent risks that should be considered very carefully. I wouldn't say excluding this option, but you need to assess things carefully and to consider the risks that can be acceptable with a institution of this sort. And then, of course, we can use similar technologies, but technologies that have been developed in-house. And with this, I'll wrap. But this is a huge dilemma. Yes, this is correct. I think it's something we should pay attention to because everybody think about having just European staff to not to be subject to the Cloud Act and so on. And that's the topic we're talking about. Yes. If we just make it a matter of responsibility, obviously we'll give responsibility to somebody else who will take it, but we will lose our ability to train, manage, and implement in-house systems for the simple fact that we are scared by the responsibility of managing systems, which obviously entail a high risk, but outsourcing risk management means depriving yourselves of those technologies that are the right ones. So we mustn't delegate cybersecurity. And the AI strategy of defense also involves a lab to develop AI solutions in-house with an Italian ecosystem. Thank you so much to Director Gabriele and Commander Sanasi. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Director. And now I'd like to call on stage Prefect Bruno Frattasi, Director General of the National Cybersecurity Agency, and let's all keep on talking about national security and cybersecurity and defense. Welcome.
I've seen that you were nodding at the proposal by Director Gabriele to reform public administration to make it increasingly digital and increasingly cyber. Dear Prefect, in my introduction and in our teaser, we use this motto, cybersecurity and national security. You are the most authoritative person to explain why this is the case. First of all, here it is. Otherwise, nobody could have ever heard my response. And maybe this was not such a problem. First of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you for your kind invitation. I come back very willingly in a place where I've been a participant because I have been a central director of the Department of Public Security, law enforcement. I dealt with coordination and planning of the law enforcement. In those 2 years, I could cooperate with Antonio Manganelli. I was in an office which was direct report to him. Antonio was and still is in my heart. He was a great chief of law enforcement. So I thank you very much for the memory you wanted to for this remembering him. So national security and cybersecurity. It is clear that national security goes through the protection of our critical infrastructures, the strategic ones, the ones which have already been subject to protection even before the many regulations were issued by the European Union through the NIS directives and through the Regulation on AI Act and through a series of regulatory interventions which provided us with a rather complicated and complex regulatory framework which was then transposed in our national regulation, because even before this agency was established, a piece of legislation was passed, which is called Perimeter, which established the national cybersecurity perimeter. It is in this perimeter which we consider to be the safe of the country, the stronghold within which we must put all of the activities which relate to essential function services for the continuity of the life of the country. We protect them through this piece of legislation. And this piece of legislation today charges the Agency for National Cybersecurity with very sensitive and delicate tasks, which I would like to summarize here. First of all, the task relating to the obligation, which is kind of tough, obligation of notification of incidents for all subjects within the perimeter and which receive an attack which compromises the digital security of their service. They must notify the Italian CERT, which is a body which was not at the agency when the agency did not exist, was with another ministry, the Ministry of Economic Development at that time, for those who remember that. So it was a piece of legislation provided for that, and it was the law dating back to 2019, the law on the perimeter. And then it was transferred in line with the project of creating a unified body which relates to the systemic resilience of the country. Luigi, please let me just make an aside on this. Divert. We're talking about fragmentation of the national system in terms of cybersecurity. I heard this in relation to the presentation of the the submission of the yearly report to the Parliament. The law which provided for late 2021, the Agency for National Cybersecurity is already an answer to this fragmentation of the Italian system in terms of the country's resilience. So I see that there's still this idea of having a central role to be played by the agency, as it is the case in the other 26 countries of the European Union, where resilience is not something that a ministry is responsible for, nor something which is outside the government system of the country, but generally this is something which is dealt with by the government agency, directly reporting to whom the systems are configured in a variable way. Those which report directly to the prime minister, to the premier, or to the prime minister, and this is the case in Italy or in France or the countries. The others report to ministries which have a specific competence, because in that case there is a fragmentation of agencies. In Spain, for instance, there is a system which is slightly different from our system, and there are two bodies which report to ministries which must be then coordinated. We've eliminated this fragmentation, and we have established one single point where this activity is carried out. Let's move to the second subject, that is the technological scrutiny of the assets which are part of this perimeter. We have a certification service within agencies, certification and surveillance service, which observes, controls, and intervenes because it performs tests either directly or carries out in cooperation with the same subjects interested in applying specific digital assets within the perimeter to test and verify the ability of that asset to be used without compromising the security and resilience. So it carries out a technological check, verification, which is essential to keep the ability of the inspected structure, of the evaluated structure, to be able to, ability to be resilient to the increasing threats. I spoke of the increasing threat because, as we know, we are in times of hybrid wars. We heard about the previous presentation, and the submission of the yearly report of Parliament. Hybrid threats have been broadly mentioned, and exposure to hybrid threats have been mentioned, not only in relation to Italy but also to the other European countries. I don't need to explain the present situation we are experiencing and the fact that the threat is incremental. We've reacted also as an agency to this immediately after the events which occurred between Saturday and today. We immediately informed all the administrations of the perimeter. We sent an alert, and there has been an attack on Iran. So we told them, raise your defense, increase your defense, as we do on a regular basis. And there is another element for discussion and element for ponderation. We are inclined to consider cybersecurity and resilience in relation to times we're experiencing. I often hear words which somehow talk about like a war cybersecurity, a cybersecurity which has to deal with the real and concrete threat that we see towards other countries and we imagine might be launched against Europe. The fact that Europe is being involved in the additional conflict which was started last Saturday is not just an hypothesis. We've seen how France has reacted, as UK, United Kingdom is reacting. We know that Europe now could be one of the targets of the retaliations from that enemy front, from the Iranian front, or from proxy enemies. So not everything can be done or solved just by preparing a cyber defense only in terms of military defense of the country being faced with a threat. Behind this barrier, which must defend us against the most intense threat, which we can imagine in times of war, pre-war, I cannot use words, I'm not able to use words which can give the full meaning of what we are experiencing, but there are civilian companies, citizens, civil society, what we call civil society. This civil society is not speaking through encrypted networks. It is not communicating through security networks. It operates through open networks. It operates in an open world, and this issue of the security of the open world is a huge problem because the open world is 90% of the exchange of information and data in relation to every kind of activity, be it individual, collective. So there is an issue of systemic resilience which relates to a background which is much bigger than the tip of the iceberg, which is emerging, which I called pre-war, almost war we are experiencing. And this world, to the world we are seeing as being submerged, is a world which needs resilience, it needs security, it needs to strengthen its cybersecurity posture. For sure, we are not discussing it, and that's the reason why there is a civil or civilian agency like the National Cybersecurity Agency, which is looking at this world. It cannot look at this world without considering the tip emerging from the surface of the water. So there is a problem of integration and coordinating the institutional actors which are and who are somewhat engaged by this cyber threat. So the issue is coordination, confronting this threat and the dynamics triggered by this. Do we want to tackle this or solve it through somebody observing it from above? I don't think it is possible. Our last question, Prefect, considering the intrinsically dual use nature of emerging technologies, which are able to strengthen defense but also amplify potential effects of cyber threats, which are the strategies which are necessary to guarantee the proper balance between innovation and security? Thank you for your question. I see that the audience is moving because Minister Matteo Piantedosi is joining us. Minister, good morning. Thank you very much. Let's have the Minister take a seat. Let's wait for everybody so I can thank and welcome Vittorio Pisani for the kind invitation. Now, the question you asked relates to the relationship innovation and security. This is something which is of central importance today. Security can't but be fed through technological innovation, which is strongly and broadly expanding. The agency deals with that from two points of view, two perspectives. I'm mentioning the main ones. The first one is that it has promoted and adopted already in 2023, which was revised at the beginning of this year, a national agenda for research, development, and innovation. We've done it 3 years ago in cooperation with, and I go back to the issue of cooperation and coordination, which I mentioned in my previous answer, with the Ministry of University and Research, Anna Maria Bernini, and the Undersecretary who has a delegation for cybersecurity, Alfredo Mantovani. We reviewed this year on the wake of what has been adopted 3 years ago, basically keeping that approach which considers emerging technologies. And today we've updated and upgraded that in relation to the three technology sectors, AI, quantum computing, and OT, operational technologies. From this point of view, our action aims at making it possible for an intermediation space to exist between what arrives from applied research and industrial production to go towards technology transfer. What is favored in terms of digital sovereignty, which is a big word, but we can say less dependence, less technological dependence on foreign suppliers. Sandro was mentioning the high-end hyperscalers, our dependence on big US, North American providers which have monopolized the market. And this is an issue which National Prosecutor Melillo talked about when he spoke of sovereignty and the comparison between Europe and North America based on the different visions of the two worlds, one looking at the freedom of expression and thought in a way which is very different from what Europe does, and the other one which talks and relates to privacy and the protection of the people with a different perspective. So we need to find a mediation, and this is something which dates back to many years ago. It was started many years ago, but never reached a final point. But steps forward are being made, progress is being made to bring these two worlds together, which belong to the West, and they should share the same values of democracy and fundamental freedoms. They've been connected. And the other side of innovation is Cyber Innovation Network, which is a very interesting initiative which we launched a few weeks ago with the presentation in Rome, with the presence of private operators and the university world. We presented the first 12 startups selected by an initiative which the agency has been carrying out, which can be promising research activities, applied research activities, which already led to an industrial production of these innovative devices, some of which, or many of which, are looking at AI applications. There is one which can be used also for activities, and there is a reference of investigation and policing activities as voice recognition to the authenticity of the voice. It would be enough to apply an AI. I mean, it would be enough. Let's hope it is enough to apply an AI system to understand whether the voice is or forged, though copied perfectly, or if it's the original one. We had cases of ministers whose voice had been, or the voice had been copied or had been imitated to disseminate fake news and or other problems, and we leave the space and room for investigation. But innovative startups can do something which is for the purpose of the whole country and identify the vulnerabilities in a system, thereby trying to provide an answer which starts from the agency of the National Cybersecurity and has been working together with the other sectors. I do not want to neglect anyone, and we've achieved tangible results. And the biggest advantage is that we've developed startups which are Italian startups, were created in Italy. There is also participation by other countries like Polish. But the brand is Italian, governance is Italian, the capital is Italian, control and process is Italian. Thank you, Prefect. Thanks for sharing your vision with us and the strategy of cybersecurity. I would like to thank also Roberta Mistichella. I would like to ask my colleagues to prepare the stage with two chairs because we are about to carry out the interview with Minister Matteo Piantedosi, who is Minister of Interiors. Good morning and welcome to CyberSec.
Benvenuta a questa conferenza nella Scuola Superiore.
Buongiorno a tutti.
So good morning to everybody. Welcome to the Police Academy and to this conference. It's a pleasure to have you here. Please take your seat, Minister. So, Minister, I would start off from the war in Iran. What measures and countermeasures within your competence have you put in place from the very beginning, from the outbreak of the war? Well, obviously, the outbreak of war prompted us, as we highlighted last Monday in the meeting, which was held between the intelligence and law enforcement agencies and the anti-terrorism committee that was convened immediately after the outbreak of the war. And what we started to tackle, to do, was to create a scenario of risk and develop the necessary measures amongst the things concerning the protection of sensitive sites and the monitoring of the course of the war, because experience has taught us this government is faced with the third war right now, let's call it global conflict, that has an impact on national security. And experience has taught us that we also need to monitor how ideological positionings will be developed as the war goes on, with repercussions on other movements. And we did another kind of reasoning. I'm talking about Postal Police Service and Cybersecurity and Knipage, the armamentarium of practices, habits, and methodology has been obviously alerted and we're issuing obviously some alerts. And we have obviously wars have become increasingly pervasive, so we have consolidated professionalism, and there was an alert for very critical infrastructure. So I believe that I can, as far as I am concerned, I can rely on our national cybersecurity architecture, and that we can rely on some barriers that have proven to be quite effective. So critical infrastructure that are the target of countries that consider us as a hostile country. So the government is securing this critical infrastructure, but as well as the digital systems of the administration. Is that correct? Yes. As I was saying, for some time, and following the coordination that takes place at the government through the agency above all, we are increasingly defining the consolidation of a cybersecurity perimeter, a national architecture of cybersecurity. As I was saying, we have contributed to this initiative over the past months and years, reconsidering our internal organization. And we have obviously set up a central directorate where we can obviously tackle these kinds of threats in a more systematic manner and a better organized manner in line with times. And I wanted to propose and put in place a committee on cybersecurity. As you know, there was the experience of the intelligence system in Parliament, and this was mentioned as an important experience. It's a place where the law enforcement agencies, intelligence and emergency services meet and exchange data. This could be something obvious, but I can assure you that there are few cases in which this happens systematically and in such a professional way, in a thorough way, without jealousy of one's own autonomy. I think this is fundamental. Yes, absolutely. And obviously, being aware of this innovation, this is not mine. Obviously, I wanted to apply this to cybersecurity. And so we have set up a similar place where there can be an exchange, and this involves the National Cybersecurity Agency. This is the organization we wanted to give, in addition to some alerts that have been provided by the facilities based on the data past year that were hardly negligible compared to the actions carried out and the critical situations that have been detected on the various fronts. And so based on that, we have reorganize things and reorganize our alert system. So we have a new geopolitical system, the public administration under the aegis of intelligence can counterattack a cyber attack. Privately, this is impossible. In Germany, the debate was initiated and there was a bill to include hacking back. In Italy, can we initiate this similar kind of discussion and introduce what we can define as legitimate cyber defense? I think that Germany is more advanced in this discussion and debate because it was more targeted by attacks, cyber attacks. So it's pioneering because it has suffered more attacks. Yes, they have suffered more attacks. It's the topic of the day. It's a very delicate issue that will bring together the assessments of jurists, technicians, experts, because what is this is very evident because I think 3 or 4 years ago, this was not possible to engage in a sort of counterattack when it comes to cybersecurity. Today, this is envisaged that allowing privates to do this is something extremely delicate. So it's only fair to consider the matter carefully and thoroughly. I can propose this. This could be one of the topics that we can propose in one of the next meetings. Now, the head of the police talked about the risks of end-to-end encryption, which, if on the one hand ensures privacy to good people, it also ensures the privacy of villains. How can we better balance this? This is the topic of topics, but I have been dealing with law enforcement and internal affairs and judicial systems. So this is really a crucial theme, a crucial issue. Attackers, criminals always have a competitive edge. They can afford not to be constrained by issues such as privacy or data protection, which instead is something very important that derives above all from the framework of European rules. Europe is very strict and not without reason, but it's only too clear that the growth of technological potentialities that are all to the benefit of criminal organizations that have resources to acquire this know-how and the technologies as such. And as I was saying, they don't have the constraints of a system and investigators have. So this calls for an effort to rebalance this competitive edge. Obviously, this is an issue, and this is something that all privates are asking themselves about. It's the essence of providers to promote products that ensure privacy, end-to-end encryption, and the protection of the privacy of communication. So this is obviously something that we can understand only too well, but we also have to deal with the needs for investigations that are increasing cross-national, increasing technological complex and complicated, and for specialists. If we stuck to a very rigid position, that would lead to a difference in competitiveness between criminal organization and investigation agencies. No, cyber threats and cognitive warfare can also influence democracies. On 22 and 23rd March, we have to vote for a constitutional referendum to reform the justice system. How can the Ministry Interiors can guarantee a cyber secure referendum? Well, since we have continued with a traditional system and haven't resorted to electronic voting, that will surely be of help. Yes, that's true. That too is a very active debate. Now, aside from the joke, this is something that we need to keep talking about, because the developments offered by technologies, some associate this with the need to create the conditions to encourage more people to vote and making it easier for voters to vote, growing the increasingly lower percentage of voters actually voting. But this is not an issue of secondary importance, because when there are elections, the topics that are perhaps that are essential. We have these surveys, and then we wait for the data of the Ministry of Interiors that obviously help fuel the system of projections, which hardly ever fail. So the communication systems run on digital networks. So we wanted to make sure that this data could be safe. Obviously the results will be announced based on traditional systems, but it's also very important that as soon as the ballots are opened, that there is no alterations or elements of disturbance carried out intentionally to create some destabilization in the public debate. And we've organized ourselves by creating systems, so dual track systems, to make the whole system less attackable. And so and if a system is attacked, there's a sort of backup, a recovery plan that can be activated without stopping the communication of data, because the communication is important. Even though it's not as important in terms of the final results, it is important. It does have an important political weight. Now, lastly, cybersecurity is not just a technological challenge, it's also a social and cultural challenge. How can we all together increase the culture of cybersecurity in Italy? You are at the school, at the police academy of the state, and you're in the best place to handle this topic and to give an answer to this question, because the police has used a lot of resources for dissemination, so meeting young people and talking about activities that concern the activities of the police and legality, and specifically the approach to digitization. And I think that we have an initiative. We've had it ongoing for some years. There was a life on social media, and I think there's one for boomers. Yes, to educate parents too. So all this, and I'm saying this, the data tell us that obviously this is can be done remotely or through on the field. I think we've reached about just less than 1 million youths who have been involved. This is something very important because I think that no technology, no security system will be able to play an appropriate role without considering dissemination and cultural aspects. For now, you will probably remember the success of the penetration of private surveillance systems. In those cases, I was told that most of those cases were based not on specific hacking activities, but on the lack of attention or inappropriate use made by the owners of those systems who didn't change passwords. So dissemination about the correct use of digital systems, both from the standpoint of data protection and so privacy, as I was mentioning, and more generally for youth to have there are phenomena concerning cyberbullying and other things of the sort. So we have to make sure that the web and social media should not be a channel to showcase all the weaknesses of youth. This is something that we're paying a lot of attention to, not just with the contribution that it gives to the architecture for the protection of digital system, but also through dissemination activities. Minister, it was a great pleasure to have you here and to conclude this first session of CyberSec. Thank you so much.
Riprende i suoi due smartphone. È stato veramente un motivo di orgoglio.
So there was a reason of pride to interview Minister Piantedosi. I'm going to join Roberta Mistigali and would like to thank you for your attention. Roberto, what can we add? Well, first of all, thank you. After lunch, we will have some ad hoc thematic sessions and we'll have some distinguished colleagues of the state and law enforcement agents starting from 2:30 p.m. in Aula De Gasperi, in Aula Parisi. We'll be having many interesting contributions. Thank you.